Cooper Antique smelled of aged pine and slow, quiet afternoons. Eden Crestwood ran her fingers along a smooth walnut sideboard. Sawyer Brennick, wearing blue flannel with sawdust on one rolled cuff, crouched to test a joint. Marjorie, the shop owner, returned with the receipt. "Your husband knows his wood, ma'am. You picked well." Sawyer smiled. She also picked a lamp with a broken switch and refused to admit it. "My wife always wins the furniture arguments," Sawyer joked, and Marjorie laughed. Sawyer laughed, but Eden just stared down at her hands, quiet and withdrawn. "I wish that weren't a joke," Eden murmured. Marjorie stopped laughing. Sawyer froze. Black Mountain faded behind them as the truck climbed onto the Blue Ridge Parkway. The pines stood close to the road, dark, silent, and steady. Eden turned her face toward the passenger window and kept it there. Sawyer drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the shifter. He let 3 miles pass before he spoke. "Hey," his voice was easy. "Wife, you're awfully quiet over there." Eden didn't look at him. "Don't call me that if you're only joking, Sawyer." His hand tightened on the steering wheel. The air inside the truck cabin shifted instantly. He did not try to speak again. They descended into Asheville under a clear, bright noon sky and turned toward Montford. Here, the historic houses leaned close, looking like old friends trading neighborhood gossip. Eden's grand house sat halfway up the block. A classic 2-story home with peeling cream paint and a wide front porch. 6 weeks of his crew's labor had finally made the place solid again. Just 2 more weeks would make it hers. They began unloading in silence. The walnut sideboard, the brass lamp, and 2 laid-back chairs came first. Then the small bookcase Eden bought because its wavy wood grain reminded her of passing storms. Sawyer carried the heavy pieces while Eden quietly studied the doors. They barely spoke, and when they did, the words were strictly about tight angles and door clearance. Loretta Pickens watched them from her parlor window next door, but chose to stay inside. She was watching 8-year-old Posie for the morning, which she often did when Sawyer was busy working. Loretta had been Sawyer's loyal client for 3 years. Back then, he rebuilt the historic sash windows in her parlor without breaking a single pane of old glass. 6 weeks ago, she picked up the phone and called Eden directly. She had loved Eden's late mother like her own sister. She told her that only one contractor in Asheville could be trusted with the Montford property. And that was exactly how Sawyer first learned Eden's name. Over those 6 weeks, they developed a polite, very specific working rhythm. He brought her coffee on Thursdays, remembering she once said those days were the toughest. She remembered how he ate his lunch, never saying a word when she watched him. Today was the very first time they had ever stood together outside of a construction zone. Once the final piece was inside, Sawyer parked the heavy dolly upright by the door. "I'll be back Monday for the threshold," he said. "Monday," Eden replied. He nodded. Stepping off the porch, he climbed into his truck and drove away without looking back at her window. As he climbed halfway up Patton Avenue, he suddenly thought of Malene for the first time in weeks. A brief memory of her at their old kitchen sink, hair tied back, laughing at one of his jokes. 5 years gone now. Posie was only 3 back then. He had no idea what to do with the memory. He let the quiet memory sit in the cab beside him and kept driving. Back in her quiet kitchen, Eden sat alone at the rustic oak table she purchased the month before. Her phone lay face down on the wood. She flipped it over, seeking a real connection. The screen stayed dark. Her high status meant nothing in this quiet, aching moment. No messages were sent. She couldn't type, but she couldn't let go of hope. Holding on to the possibility of something real, not yet ready to surrender. Outside, the afternoon sun drifted across the floorboards, indifferent to her corporate titles. 3 long days passed with only heavy, humbling silence. On Monday, Sawyer began laying floors, finding peace in humble, honest work. He worked with salvaged white oak planks, custom milled from an old barn outside Weaverville. Fitting them tongue to groove, he gently tapped each plank into line with a mallet. This simple labor quieted his mind, proving happiness does not require a crown. Yet Eden was completely absent. She remained trapped in her wealthy corporate world of endless breakfast meetings, properties, and late planning sessions that dragged on well past 9. By Wednesday morning, her assistant stopped asking why her calendar was suddenly so packed. On Tuesday afternoon, little Posie ran straight to the job site after school, seeking her father's loving presence. Dropping her backpack by a sawhorse, she pulled out a quick snack. Then she reached for his worn canvas tool roll, looking at him with pure, simple love. She lifted a bronze hand plane, its polished edge glowing from his careful touch. "What is this for?" she asked. "Stanley number 4, Sawyer replied. Setting his mallet aside, he knelt down, cherishing this precious moment together. "A smoothing plane, here, hold it like this." He gently guided her tiny hands around the handle and knob. "Push from your shoulder, not your wrist." With long strokes she pushed. A delicate ribbon of pine curled up from the wood, incredibly thin, like a soft whisper. Giggling with pure pride, she kept working under his loving, patient gaze. Loretta Pickens walked up the front steps just after 4. Knocking on the open door, she smiled warmly at the sweet child playing with wooden shavings. But when her eyes met Sawyer's, her gentle smile faded into heavy sadness. She placed a thick, sealed manila envelope on his bench, his name written in neat hand. "I have held this for 2 years," she whispered. "It is time." He waited until his daughter had wandered off to draw before finally opening the heavy packet. Inside was official legal stationery from Portland containing a copy of his father's will. Alongside it lay a returned notice, which had been sent to his old home in Charlotte. A second registered letter, sent 6 months after the first. Finally, a handwritten note on yellow paper, written in a hand he hadn't seen in 20 years. "Sawyer, I am not asking for your forgiveness. I only ask that you let my granddaughter know who her grandfather truly was, however you choose." Signed, Dad, dated just 9 days before the old man passed away. He was actually the sole heir to a massive timber fortune. Over $340 million in standing timber, a mill, and a legacy spanning 4 generations of family history. But he had walked away from all that wealth when his wife died. He read it again. Scanning the words a third time, he sighed. "I left that life behind, Loretta." His voice was steady. "I am not returning for money. It is not about money, Sawyer." She remained standing. "It is your father." He quietly folded the packet closed. He took the envelope to his truck and locked it away in the glove compartment. He left the file unopened for the rest of the day. Across town at her grand corporate offices on Battery Park Avenue, the receptionist buzzed Eden. "Ma'am, a Mr. Marshall Crowder is here with no appointment. He says he has 15 minutes of something you will want to hear." Eden glanced at her schedule, then at the wall and her hands. "Send him in." Marshall Crowder was 44, dressed in a charcoal jacket with no tie, carrying a leather portfolio that made absolutely no sound when opened. He sat down right across from her without even being invited, and his easy confidence showed he had spent years practicing never asking anyone. "Miss Crestwood," his smile was small and patient, "let us get to the point. I read about your March divorce in the Citizen Times and the Highlands News last week. I even read about the modest house you bought in Montford the month after." Eden sat perfectly still. "I am not here to sell you anything today," Marshall said. "I just want to ask you one question, then I will leave if you want." She waited. "Why did you choose the smallest home you were allowed to choose? Right when you had the power to buy the biggest mansion." The room fell completely silent. She kept quiet. Her silence spoke loudly enough for both of them. He studied her silence for 2 long seconds, then slowly slid the portfolio toward her. The photographs were stunning. A stone and cedar estate nestled in the forest, 6 bedrooms, a private pond, 12 acres backing onto Pisa Ridge. He talked about the property like other men bragged about horses they had broken themselves. "It is off-market," he murmured, "completely private. The owner wants to keep it quiet." He had already secured private financing through a discreet firm based in Charlotte. A refundable deposit of $250,000 would hold it for 60 days for due diligence. He chose not to pressure her. "Just come see it this Saturday," he offered. "If you walk away after looking at it, you walk away. I will never call you again." Eden stared at the photos for a long time. "Saturday," she agreed. He walked out without another word. He left the expensive portfolio sitting on her desk for her to keep. Meanwhile, in Montford, Sawyer finished the real work on the shelves, adding the brass cups. His daughter Posie sat at the counter, with the little birdhouse he had handmade for her last week. She held a paintbrush in one tiny hand with a jar of dark blue paint open nearby. The birdhouse had its second coat. "Do not drip on the floor." "I won't drip on the floor, Daddy." Eden stepped in through the back door just after 6. She placed her keys on the counter and stood quiet in the kitchen doorway, watching the father and daughter share a simple, warm moment before they even noticed her. Sawyer saw her first. He kept his hand steady on the cup pull. "Sawyer." Eden spoke in a soft voice. "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't." He did not turn. "Yes, I do. I have treated you poorly for 3 days." He set his screwdriver down and turned to face her, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans. The warm kitchen light hit him gently, softening the tired lines around his kind eyes. "Eden," he looked straight at her. "You do not owe me anything. You spoke the truth. I was just the one who did not know how to handle it." She stayed quiet. She gave a single nod. Posie looked up from her project. "Miss Eden, want to paint?" Eden looked at the sweet girl, the small brush, and the messy blue paint. She walked over and pulled up a stool, choosing this simple warmth over any grand estate, and grabbed a brush. "Show me where," Eden said gently. Posie pointed to a tiny door on the wooden birdhouse. "White, please, right there." Eden dipped her paintbrush and began. Sawyer turned back to the couples and quietly worked. The grand Biltmore Forest property stood secluded, down a drive lined with rhododendron. The afternoon light hit the stone facade just as Marshall promised, while the backyard pond lay quiet and still under a thin layer of golden pollen. He led her through the empty house in stocking feet. He talked up the fancy staircase joinery and the historic white oak in the dining room. He floated the high numbers softly. He promised the fast closing schedule would have her moved in by August. He rattled off wire transfer details, but Eden hesitated, asking for a week to think. "I am not going anywhere," Marshall promised, just before the local gossip blog went live. Written by Holly Tanner, the cheap headline screamed from the top. Crestwood's powerful CEO finds a rugged distraction in her post-divorce reset. Beneath it, paparazzi photos captured them through an antique shop window. Eden's hand rested on a sideboard, while Sawyer knelt nearby with sawdust on his sleeve. The article dismissed him as just some contractor she was using. With a smug tone, it mocked how recently divorced women seek comfort, claiming women in their late 30s sometimes lose their way for a season. It even named her private home renovation site. Cruelly, it noted that the contractor's young daughter was hanging around after school. Sawyer was simply eating a sandwich on his truck tailgate when the link arrived from one of his crew members. He read the trash once, then set his phone face down on the steel. He pressed his calloused hands flat on the wooden table and breathed in deeply for a slow count of 4. He did not call her. Eden finally arrived home a little after 7. Her car was still warm in the driveway when she spotted him sitting on her bottom porch step. His jacket was folded over his lap, waiting patiently in the gathering dark. "I do not know who leaked it," she said, staying below. "I do," Sawyer replied quietly. He handed her his phone, showing 3 open tabs that exposed the whole game. The first was that gossip article about them. The second was a January post about another recently divorced business owner in Hot Springs. It was written almost word for word the same way. Exactly 4 weeks after that post, the gallery owner signed an off-market real estate agreement with a consultant hidden from the public files. The third tab showed a similar story about a lonely widow in Boone. Same predatory template, same byline. Followed by the same 4-week wait before she wired a fortune to some private company in Delaware. Eden read it, her eyes widening as she realized. "Marshall," she whispered. "Most likely," Sawyer said. "Do not sign anything until I find out." She did not ask why he cared enough to look. She just nodded. He sat silently on the wooden step, and she sat down a quiet, respectful distance beside him. Across the small hedge, a neighbor's porch light flickered on in the quiet evening. Loretta watched them from her window with a mug in hand, staying inside. As the street lamps glowed amber, Eden placed her hand on the step between them. Sawyer's hand stayed on his knee. Neither of them moved. The elite Crestwood board met in their sterile conference room on the 4th floor of the Battery Park building at 9 on Wednesday morning. 8 leather chairs around the walnut table, coffee already poured. The meeting minutes circulated, just papers tracking status and corporate games. Then Cyrus Tamain spoke. He was a man defined by his 90s real estate fortune, holding a board seat only because of his late wife's social status. She served on the founding committee, while he obsessed over how things looked to others. He tossed a gossip article onto the table, aiming to damage her. "I want to add a vote of confidence to our agenda," Cyrus announced. We must worry about appearances for our big clients, not just Eden's true worth, he claimed. Hearing this, Loretta, a quiet board veteran of 22 years who valued real character over corporate gossip, set down her pen. I have watched this board for 2 long decades, she said. None of you questioned her leadership when she faced a painful, public divorce. No one judged her when she selflessly let her ex-husband keep their lake home. You did not doubt her vision when she chose to invest in Montford. Yet today we are judging her entire character based on a faceless blog post. That is not leadership, that is cruel opportunism. The room fell silent. The vote was cast 6-5 favoring Eden. Cyrus sat defeated and silent. He packed up his folded gossip article, unable to meet the eyes of those who saw through his petty games. Saturday morning brought them to the warm, down-to-earth local farmers' market. Stalls crowded the brick path, filling the morning air with honest scents of fresh basil and grass. Sawyer walked hand in hand with little Posie. They were buying fresh farm eggs from a small table when Eden walked up from the parking area, leaving her powerful status behind with just a simple coffee cup. No formal messages, no scheduling. She just wanted to be near them, so they walked. Posie eagerly ran ahead toward a vibrant stand filled with simple yellow daisies. I have to sign the contract with Marshall tomorrow, Eden said, sounding tired. You asked me to wait, so I did. Sawyer paused in the crowd. Give me 3 days, he urged. Why? Just 3 days. A sudden ring broke the quiet moment. He checked his phone. It was Knox, his loyal former teammate. I need to take this call. He stepped under a shady tree to listen, focusing entirely on the voice of his trusted brother. He nodded in quiet understanding, thanked his loyal friend, and hung up. When he returned, his eyes held a protective intensity that was not there before. Without any complicated corporate explanation, he simply pleaded, 3 days, do not sign. Trust me on this. Eden looked deep into his eyes and quietly agreed, okay. Posie skipped back, proudly holding a simple wild bundle of yellow daisies. For you, Miss Eden, she smiled, handing over the wet stems. Eden accepted them gratefully. A fleeting, warm touch of childhood innocence that meant more than any business deal. Watching them connect, a ghost of his past briefly crossed his mind and vanished, leaving only this genuine presence. They walked on. By Friday, Sawyer's loyal friend Knox had driven up from Charlotte. They shared 7 intense years of military service, a deep bond built on survival and trust. Now Knox quietly investigated financial deceit, exposing truths hidden behind wealthy facades. He arrived with an unassuming black folder and an air of quiet confidence. His deliberate, focused posture was a familiar comfort to Sawyer. They gathered in Sawyer's humble workshop, a place of honest, down-to-earth labor. While Posie played safely, Renee, the listing broker, arrived with crucial, honest answers. Meeting them at 4, this seasoned 21-year real estate veteran had zero interest in pleasantries or games. The estate has languished on the open market for 96 days, she revealed. She claimed there were 3 pending offers. It was never actually part of any private off-market financing program. I do not know Marshall Crowder. If he told your client otherwise, he is lying. She had been spreading that lie to local brokers for the last 2 years. None of the contracts Marshall drafted were ever clean enough to bring to a civil court. Knox dropped another folder on the workbench. The federal side is a different story. A secret federal wire fraud investigation had been open in the Western District of North Carolina since the spring of 2022. The Charlotte field office. 2 local women had each lost $60,000 to $80,000 to a shady shell company that took 13 months to trace. Through complex forensic accounting back to a Delaware company owned solely by Marshall Crowder. The government had finally reached the indictment stage last month. Knox had an inside contact on the team who was ready for new evidence. Sawyer leaned against his workbench, listening quietly, while Renee gathered her things to leave. Before walking out, she warned, "Get your friend out before she signs anything. He is good. That is exactly what makes him so dangerous." Later that night, after Knox drove south, Loretta Pickens called Sawyer over to her quiet Montford porch. A cold glass of sweet southern tea was already waiting for him. An old worn leather photo album rested on the wicker table. It was in Vivian's house when she died. Loretta said, "I have kept it for 7 years. Eden has never asked to see it." She opened to a page showing a photograph from 1996. It showed a sunlit lawn in front of a low brick. building with the words Forestry Sciences Laboratory carved clearly above the entrance. Two young women in flannel shirts, arms around each other, laughing at something out of frame. "That is Vivian Crestwood," Loretta said, "and Margaret Brennick." "Your mother," Sawyer remained completely silent. They were thesis partners back at the University of Oregon. They dreamed of building a sustainable resort using timber from your family land in Coos Bay. But when she married into Bren in 1998, your grandfather forced her off the project. She died 6 months after you were born, leaving Vivian to carry on alone. That shared dream became the foundation of Crestwood hospitality. Loretta gently closed the album. "This is not fate, Sawyer. It is just two mothers who once shared a beautiful dream. A connection that broke 30 years ago. You and Eden are under no obligation to fix it. I am telling you this because you deserve the truth." Sawyer drove home in silence. Sitting in his quiet workshop, he opened the manila envelope from his truck on the table for the first time. He read his father's will all the way down to the final codicil. A third of the Bren timberland was left to the only daughter of Margaret, in the exact way she would have wanted to be understood. And that daughter, explicitly named in the legal document, was Eden Crestwood. He sat there for a very long time. Sunday evening fell soft and pink over the rooftops of Montford. At 6:55, Marshall Crowder parked his black sedan by the curb with the contract and a stack of deposit forms on the passenger seat. Eden opened the front door. She set the dining table under the glow of a single lamp. 2 pens were placed neatly beside his seat, and her hands were completely steady. She had not seen Sawyer since Friday. Marshall sat down and began talking about the closing schedule. Marshall uncapped his expensive pen and slid the bogus deposit paperwork across the table to Eden. A knock echoed 2 minutes later, making the smooth talker look up. Glancing at Eden, Marshall stood up to answer the door himself and swung it open. "You picked a bad time, Bren," Sawyer said, stepping right past him. Under his arm, Sawyer carried a simple manila folder. He walked to the table and set down 3 heavy pieces of truth before her, one after another. First, a signed statement written on Renee Linwood's official letterhead. The Biltmore Forest property had been sitting on the public market for 96 days. It had 3 competing offers, completely untouched by any private financing deal. Renee Linwood did not know Marshall Crowder at all. Second was a redacted summary of an active federal wire fraud investigation cleared by Knox's contact. An active North Carolina investigation that was formally indicting Marshall. His Delaware shell company stole $140,000 from Charlotte women in 2022. Third, a small digital recorder. Sawyer quietly pressed play. Knox Endicott's calm, steady voice detailed recorded calls with 2 more victims in Asheville. Women whom Marshall had targeted in the last 3 weeks. Same script, same urgent $250,000 deposit, using the forest property as bait. Marshall kept his smug smile for the first 30 seconds. His confidence wavered, shifting his weight when he heard the federal summary. By the time the audio stopped, his fake smile had completely vanished. "Eden," he pleaded, his voice falsely warm, "this is just professional jealousy." He is a contractor, only reacting out of jealousy. Eden kept her eyes on the wooden table, her voice dropping to a low, quiet whisper. "I never mentioned Sawyer. How did you know to leak those photographs?" A heavy silence filled the room. Marshall glared at Sawyer, his mouth twisting in defeat. "Slumming with a handyman, are we?" Eden stood up and grabbed the contract folder. She tore the paper in half with the slow, deliberate focus of someone finally seeing the truth. Dropping the shredded contract onto the wood, she pointed directly at the door. "Get out of my house," she commanded. Marshall froze for a long second. Then he grabbed his briefcase, marched past Sawyer without a look, and let himself out. The door clicked shut behind his exit, leaving the room completely silent. Eden stood frozen, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Though she wasn't crying, her shaking hands betrayed the heavy weight she was trying to hide. Sawyer kept his respectful distance, adding that Knox had tipped off the FBI 3 hours ago. He said, "He won't get to pull this on anyone else." Eden nodded. Still facing away, she finally whispered, "How long have you known?" "I suspected Wednesday and knew by Friday," he admitted. "You didn't tell me," she whispered. "I needed real proof so you wouldn't think I was just jealous." Eden let out a short, bitter laugh, feeling entirely exhausted by it all. Her strength quickly gave out. She walked away from the dining table, seeking refuge near the raw, half-finished fireplace in the front room. With the new mantel leaning against the brick, she sat on the dusty floor, holding her knees tight. Sawyer followed, quietly sitting on the floor beside her, an arm's length away. They sat in peaceful silence for a while. Around them, the old house settled quietly into the cool evening air. Outside, a neighbor ran a sprinkler, casting a quiet rhythm over the humble street. A car cruised slowly by. The dining lamp cast a warm square of light near the door, leaving their quiet, shared corner untouched by its glow. The fireplace tile felt cold against Eden's back, penetrating her simple cotton shirt. She leaned back, seeking anything solid to anchor her fragile reality. "Eden was the first at Cooper," she said. "For half a second I felt happy." She looked away. "But then you laughed, and I just felt foolish." "I wasn't laughing at you," Sawyer murmured, his voice soft and sincere. "I laughed because it wasn't funny. I honestly just didn't know how to react." The silence shifted, softening as they connected. Marshall had been right about one detail. Eden admitted, "I picked the smallest house allowed because I was exhausted from playing a giant." "I understand that," Sawyer replied. She glanced at him, then returned to the flames. He sighed softly. "Eden, Loretta passed something along to me last night. You need to see this." He pulled an old photo from his pocket. He had kept it close all day. Now he placed it on the floor between them. Eden picked it up carefully, staring at the old photograph in a long, quiet silence. She angled it toward the window, letting the street lamp illuminate their faces before turning back. Those faces were so young, frozen in a time before they knew who would leave first. "That is my mother and Mina," she whispered, looking up at him. It was her first genuine look at him since Marshall had stormed out of her life. He explained the college partnership they had shared back in Oregon. The grand business plans, the marriage, and the heavy family expectations. His mother passing 6 months after his birth, leaving Vivian to struggle on alone. He kept quiet about his father's will and the valuable timberlands. Wealth didn't matter now. "Not tonight," he said. "Loretta calls it a thread, not fate. I believe her." "My mother kept it secret," Eden murmured. "She spared you from that burden." Eden clutched the picture tight, refusing to let go of this fragile connection. A soft creak echoed from above, bare feet padding softly down the stairs. Little Posie stood on the landing, wearing an oversized, comfortable sleeping shirt. She held a half-carved wooden bird, her hair messy and flat from sleep. Sawyer had spent the afternoon restoring the old wooden floors. He had let his daughter nap nearby on a simple folded sleeping bag. She walked down slowly, step by step, asking no questions about their late-night talk. Crawling onto the floor beside Eden, she clutched her toy and rested her head against the woman's arm. Eden looked down at the sweet child leaning against her and smiled softly. For once, a peaceful, healing silence wrapped around all three of them. 2 weeks passed quickly. Police arrested Marshall Crowder at a cheap hotel near the airport on Wednesday, charging him with 5 counts of fraud. The local paper quickly retracted their gossip piece about Eden and Sawyer Bren within 48 hours of a threat from her lawyer. They fired the journalist Holly after discovering 2 years of secret bribe payments. These kickbacks came from Marshall's shell company, disguised as simple freelance fees. No public apology was made, just a corrupt name quietly deleted from the masthead. Sawyer quietly kept rebuilding the historic house. He laid the threshold, hanging the front door straight and true. He finished the mantel. Eden finally stopped staying late at work. That first Tuesday, she arrived at 11 in the morning with 2 cheap paper cups of coffee from Charlotte Street. They drank them on the back porch, feet on the wooden steps, sharing a quiet, comfortable silence. He asked about her high-end Highlands project. She asked about his white oak floors. Their talk flowed naturally, starting and stopping without any pressure or expectation. By the second Tuesday, she brought along 2 simple croissants. 3 nights after the arrest, Eden called Sawyer at 9 in the evening with just one question, wondering if the 7 strip pine she wanted for the landing would warp in the humid Asheville air. In his calm, steady voice, he promised her it wouldn't. He added that he had some beautiful reclaimed heart pine in his shop she might like better. It was a short call, and neither of them mentioned a word about Marshall. And neither of them brought up that troublesome photograph. For the first time, she was calling him as a person, not just as her hired carpenter. Long after they hung up, he stood quietly in his kitchen, holding the phone in his hand before slowly setting it back down. By Thursday of the following week, leaving her office early, Eden found Sawyer up on a ladder, carefully hanging the vintage brass sconce Vivienne had once kept in her foyer. Loretta had given her the gift months ago, but Eden had just set it aside, unsure where it belonged. Sawyer had spotted it on a shelf, tucked away in the back room, and asked her if she wanted it hung up. She had agreed, quietly watching him patiently thread the electrical wires through the plaster. For the first time, she felt like she was in a real home, belonging somewhere money could never buy. Little Posie initially called her Miss Eden, but soon dropped the title naturally as they grew closer. One Wednesday afternoon, Eden brought little Posie a small hand-wrapped gift. A set of child-safe wood-carving knives. Real tools with shallow, safe blades crafted by Swiss artisans for children old enough to be trusted. Posie unwrapped the paper and held the little chisel up. "Daddy, can Eden teach me?" Sawyer smiled, replying, "Eden doesn't carve, Posie." But the wealthy executive was already dragging a kitchen chair over to his dusty garage workbench. "I can learn," she said. He stood at the door watching her. Eden gently took the child's small hand, guiding the curved chisel against a flat piece of basswood. She showed her how to carve along the natural grain instead of fighting against it. The first slow stroke made a clean, pale wood curl. Posie laughed. Watching them both hunched over the workbench, Sawyer's mind drifted back to Malene. "You would like her," he whispered silently inside his own chest. "I think you really would." No answer came back, but he didn't need one. The lingering doubt of the past 2 weeks finally settled into a quiet, sure certainty. He simply stopped hesitating, turning back to the workbench to grab his own piece of wood. By Sunday morning, the Montford house was completely finished. The floors shone with a soft, warm luster. The fireplace mantel was perfectly aligned. The hand-built bookcase stood perfectly square, and the heavy front door swung smoothly. Beautiful light streamed through the high windows, landing on the polished pine flooring. It was that slow, magical way mountain morning light falls during late spring. Sawyer arrived just before 9. Eden was in her new kitchen, brewing fresh coffee in the simple French press from her old life. The quiet kettle clicked off. Her hair was still damp, stripped of all corporate armor. Fresh coffee smelled rich and honest in the simple press. Outside, the yard's modest dogwood had finished blooming, its pale petals drifting in soft piles along an old, unpretentious fence line. On the plain shelf sat a handmade wooden frame, holding real worth. He spent the night in his dusty workshop, carefully scanning the old photo Loretta had given him, printing it on the premium matte paper he usually reserved for high-paying clients, crafting the frame himself from a discarded piece of beautiful curly maple. Just 2 young women in flannel shirts, laughing together before their lives got complicated by status. "The only copy. This is yours," he said. Eden took it, holding real history in her hands. She placed it down, turning it gently so the morning light illuminated their unpolished, happy faces. "Sawyer," her voice was soft, stripped of all executive armor. "What I said I've been feeling for weeks. I just didn't realize it until now." "I know." He didn't rush in. He respected her space, seeing her truly. He stayed quiet, refusing to force this fragile, beautiful moment into something it wasn't. Instead, he walked over and turned the simple brass knob he'd installed himself last week. He threw it wide open, letting the honest morning light flood the home. Posie sat on the porch in her worn denim overalls, holding a small handmade wooden box in her lap. She looked up, her innocent eyes welcoming them both. Lifting the lid, she proudly showed them what lay inside the box. Resting on simple blue fabric were 2 tiny hand-carved wooden birds. She had carved them herself last night. One was painted a gentle soft sky blue. The other was pale yellow, one for her dad, one for Eden. Eden stepped into her world. The elegant CEO knelt right on the dusty porch boards, bringing all 3 of them close. Posie took the blue bird and pressed it into her father's calloused palm. Then she placed the yellow bird in Eden's soft hand, closing her fingers gently around it, treating this simple token like something fragile. "Now keep it," she whispered. Overwhelmed, Eden fell silent. Sawyer placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. After a quiet moment, his other hand rested gently on Eden's back, bridging their 2 different worlds. No grand gestures, just the honest warmth of a palm. If anyone was watching, they would have stepped back onto the quiet street, leaving these three beautiful, real souls in the morning glow. Their playful dynamic had become a deep, unspoken truth, natural and unforced. But because these three souls had finally stopped fearing the word family when it was spoken aloud,